Chapter 1. The Line Beyond the Shatterrange. The Oath-bearers built their house where the free Western republics like to believe the world ended, on the western coast, within smelling distance of the azure expanse, behind clean stone and cleaner laws. Sea-wind scoured the streets outside. Salt, kelp, the sharp promise of storms that died far out on the water. Here, people could pretend the worst things belonged to the East. From the street, the Oath-bearers' headquarters wore the face of a temple. Tall arches, severe buttresses, a bell tower that never rang. The building did not invite reverence. It suggested surveillance. A man walking beneath that shadow would find his voice dropping without knowing why. Inside, there were no saints. There were names. Slate panels lined the main corridor, etched with the careful, indifferent hand of bureaucracy. Operations, interdictions, places. A map of the Republic's hidden war written in proper nouns. Some were towns that had once sent taxes and sons, and then stopped sending either. Some were names of oath-bearers who had died in a way the Republic found expensive. The Republic did not believe in monuments. Monuments grew myths. Myths bred questions. The Republic preferred ledgers. Ledgers told you what you were allowed to remember. The operations hall was bright with lanterns and colder for it. Brass fixtures, long tables, a row of windows looking west. Sea light thrown back like a blade flash. Pretty and useless. Everyone in the room faced east at a wall-sized map. Newly updated. Its lines crisp enough to cut a finger. A map is a promise, and promises rot quickest at the edges. The free Western republics sprawled along the coast, civilized as ink could make it. Inland, the Shatterrange mountains rose in jagged strokes, slate peaks like broken teeth, ridgelines like old scars. Beyond the Shatterrange, the map's confidence thinned. The borderlands were shaded in a wash of green and grey, with notes that sounded less like geography and more like warnings. Unclaimed, interdiction zones, watchfires intermittent. Exclusion areas, do not approach. Small paper flags were pinned to the map with red tacks, each a settlement name in a clerk's careful hand. Most were ordinary. Most were alive. One flag had been circled in charcoal, hard enough to dent the paper. Larchgate. At the long table beneath that circled name, Oath-bearer Interdiction Team 7 waited. They were 7, if you counted Z. Most people didn't, at least not at first glance. They saw a tall woman shaped like an elf in the way an idol is shaped. Too symmetrical, too still, too precise to be merely born. Skin pale as moonlit porcelain with a faint opalescent sheen when lantern lights struck at an angle. Hair silver white, braided tight down her back without a stray strand, like disorder itself had learned to fear her. Eyes like stormlight behind glass. Calm, luminous, and deep in a way that made a man feel he was being measured by something that had never needed his approval. It was easier for officials to call her asset. But the 7th Oath called her family, and that made her far more dangerous than any name on a file. At the head of the table stood Captain Mara Kestrel, human, mid-30s, lean athletic, the sort of woman whose strength came from refusing to be broken in public. Olive skin, grey-green eyes that didn't waste motion. Dark hair pulled into a short, tight braid. Her uniform was plain, field coat without flourish, insignia minimal, yet she wore it with the confidence of someone who'd survived the Republic's sharpest institutions and returned sharper herself. Her gloves were clean, always, even in mud, even after blood. Mara had returned twice. Returning didn't leave a scar you could point at. It left absences, a faded edge to old memories, a sense that your own name fit your mouth, but not always your heart. The hero program gave you your skill back and charged you for it, in something you didn't realize you'd miss, until you reached for it and found only air. To Mara's right sat Sergeant Rook Ven, a dwarf built like a wedge of iron. Ruddy brown skin, hair cut close, beard trimmed practical, knuckles scarred. A scar split his lower lip and pulled every expression into a crooked suggestion of a smile that rarely reached his eyes. Those eyes were dark and measuring, the kind that had watched too many men lie with confidence. Leather over chain, blade ready. A knife lay on the table in front of him like a quiet promise. Next sat Sister Halden, halfling, small and wiry, warm tan skin freckled across nose and cheeks, chestnut hair in a messy bun under a scarf. Hazel eyes that missed nothing, especially pain. Her fingers carried the faint stains of herbs, alcohol, and ink, and she kept a heavy medic satchel tucked close as if it were a child. No holy symbol hung at her throat, despite the sister in her name. Her miracles came from grit and skill, not prayer. Beside Halden sat Bram Stone Oster, half-orc, tall and broad, grey olive skin marked by pale scars. Tusks short and filed down for practicality. Dark hair close-cropped, heavy brow, steady gaze that looked intimidating until you noticed the gentleness underneath. His hands were massive, scarred and careful, as if he was always aware of how easily he could break what he meant to protect. A worn cloak draped over a shield harness and heavy gear. He sat like a wall that had learned patience. Across from Stone sat Iriel Sorn, half-elf, slender and athletic. Light bronze skin, fine angular features. Long dark hair angled to hide the subtle point of her ears. Pale green-grey eyes with a focus that felt like a blade's edge. Her fingers were ink-smudged, her cuffs faintly sooted from spellwork. Layered leathers with a hood, a satchel full of chalk and ward tools, resting near her boot like a second heart. Half-elves were rare, nearly as rare as elves, and distrusted as if they carried the Great War's ash in their blood. Iriel carried herself like someone who'd learned to live under suspicion and decided it was a poor excuse for weakness. At the far end sat Kellen Ward, tiefling, lean, deep, ember-brown skin, with a red undertone, small swept-back horns, easy to miss under his hood. Amber gold eyes that caught light the way predators' eyes did. Black hair short at the sides, longer on top, a thin tail kept tucked and controlled. Calm posture, already moving, even when still. He watched doors and corners and people's hands, as if truth lived in what they did when they thought no one was looking. And then Zeed, hands folded in her lap. Stillness like a held breath. The air around her faintly charged. Across from them sat Director Varos Dain, the Oath-bearer's liaison to the Council of Ministers. Iron-grey hair, neat beard, a calm, ledger-eyed face that made mercy look like a tactical error. He wore his authority the way he wore his coat, tailored, understated, and capable of hiding a blade. A clerk hovered at his shoulder with a stack of folders and a look that begged the world not to notice him. Clerks never sat when history might need someone to blame. Dain placed a thin slate on the table and slid it forward. Its surface shimmered under lantern light. Text arranged in crisp lines. Subject: Larchgate. Status: silent. Last contact: 5 days, 14 hours. Region: borderlands / Shatterrange foothill line. Notes: watchfires extinguished. Market Road untraveled. No refugee spillover. Mara read it once, then again, slower, like a woman trying to find the hidden clause in a contract. Stone's jaw worked. 5 days. In the old days, Rook said softly, that meant snow in the pass. In the old days, Iriel replied, not looking up. The forest didn't practice new shapes. Dain tapped the slate with one knuckle. Polite sound, unpolite intent. Larchgate sits in a river-cut valley east of the Shatterrange, he said. Timber, resin, ferry crossing when the water behaves. The kind of place the council forgets exists until it stops paying taxes. Sister Halden's mouth tightened, and it has stopped paying. It has stopped speaking, Dain corrected, which is worse. Kellen leaned forward, voice quiet enough to pull attention like a thread. No runners? None observed? Dain said. No caravans turned back. No drift into neighboring settlements. His gaze swept the team as if taking inventory. No bodies on the road. Rook's scar tugged into a half-smile. So you're telling us a town died politely? Words matter, Sergeant Venn, Dain said, particularly when they're repeated by people who can't afford nuance. You mean the council? Rook said. I mean the guild charter houses, Dain replied, and the room's warmth dropped a degree. Timber syndicates, river barons, manufactories, they've built their fortunes on the assumption that the borderlands remain a problem contained beyond the Shatterrange. Larchgate feeds 2 charter mills on the western side. Those mills now have idle blades and angry investors. There it was. The Republic's true compass. Coin pointed north more reliably than any needle. Mara's gaze flicked to the map. So the council wants answers. The council wants a story, Dain said. Answers are inconvenient. Stories are useful. He nodded. The clerk produced a second slate, marked with the oath-bearer's seal and a red strip across the top. Eyes only. A schematic of Larchgate appeared. Palisade ring, timber yard, chapel, ferry slip, market square, a watchtower on the ridge overlooking the valley. The details were precise enough to plan an assault or a rescue. Then the bullet points came. Notes a civilian report wouldn't dare include. No refugee movement on primary routes. No scavenger activity. Crows, wolves, carrion insects. Watchfire extinguished without ash scatter. Last transmission contained auditory anomaly, unresolved. Weave local distortion suspected. Field classification, Blight. The word sat on the table like a wet stone. The Blight had a dozen names, depending on who was selling fear that week. In academies, it was weave degradation and anomalous rewriting. In taverns, it was blackroot and rot magic. Along border roads, soldiers called it what it felt like: wrongness. Bloom reports along the foothill line, Holden asked. Suspected, Dain said. Unconfirmed. The council despises unconfirmed things. They make poor speeches. Mara's eyes narrowed. Auditory anomaly. Iriel's eyebrow lifted. Define? The clerk swallowed. The last voice report from Larchgate's watch commander, Lieutenant Ebris, was interrupted mid-sentence. Not cut off by distance, not cut off by damage. The signal held. The voice simply stopped, like a candle pinched between fingers. Kellen didn't blink. Play it. Dain hesitated, not long enough to refuse, just long enough to remind them he chose what they knew. Then he nodded once. The clerk pressed the slate. A chime, static, then a voice, grainy, wind-rough, hurried. To the minister's office, yes, tell them the ferry's gone. Not drifted, gone. The river, Captain, the river is... A pause. Breath caught hard, wet with panic. I can't, gods, I can't see. Static. Then something low and soft, not a roar, not a scream. Something like wet fingertips dragged across wood. Too intimate, too close. The voice returned, smaller now, as if the speaker had turned away to keep the next words from being heard. Don't listen to it. Silence. The connection stayed open 12 seconds after. A neat note on the slate recorded it, as if time itself was filing a report. Stone exhaled slow. That wasn't fear. That was instruction, Holden said, voice tightened around the edges. Z tilted her head a fraction, so small it seemed accidental. Except Z did nothing by accident. It was adapting, she said. The room shifted. It always shifted when Z spoke. Not because she raised her voice. She rarely did, but because her calm carried certainty. And certainty was terrifying when it came from something built to end worlds. Dain regarded her like a blade one needed, but didn't entirely trust. Explain. The Blight does not merely spoil, Z said. It reorders pattern. It tests response. It learns what draws attention. It learns what draws prey. Rook stared at the slate. So it learned voices. Or learned silence, Kellen murmured. Mara watched Z. There was something in Z's focus as she studied the map. Something that might have been longing in a human or threat assessment in a weapon. You've seen this kind of break, Mara said quietly. Z's eyes flicked to her. Stormlight behind glass. Yes, Z said, but not this close to a settled line. That landed like a knife between ribs. Clean, deep, unavoidable. Dain folded his hands. You will travel east over the Shatterrange and establish contact with Larchgate's perimeter. You will assess. You will contain. If the settlement is compromised, you will deny the Blight resources and routes. Deny? Rook echoed, tasting the word. You mean burn. I mean deny, Dain said evenly. Do you think the council will weep over 200 souls if the alternative is 200,000? This is the calculation they will make. I'd prefer the calculation be made by people who understand what those numbers cost. Mara held his gaze. And the political cost? Dain's mouth twitched. Almost a smile, never warmth. There it is. The part everyone pretends isn't war. He gestured to the map. Larchgate timber feeds charter mills. Those mills feed guild contracts. Those contracts feed influence. If the Republic looks weak, the Council loses control of the narrative. If the Council loses the narrative, the Republic becomes something else. Something older, uglier, crowned. And you want us to be the fix, Mara said. I want you to be the scalpel, Dain replied. Teeth bite blindly. Scalpels cut what must be cut and leave the rest alive. Holden looked down at her hands, as if remembering blood that wouldn't wash out. That's a fine story. It is, Dain agreed, and stories are how nations survive. Mara stood. Chairs scraped, boots shifted. The seventh oath rose with her like a single practiced thought. She looked to Z. Ready? Z's expression didn't change, but the air around her felt, just for an instant, charged, like the pause before lightning. I am, Z said. And so is it. No one asked what she meant, not because they didn't want to know, but because they did. The Republic's roads were clean near the coast and cruel beyond it. Day 1, salt air gave way to pine. Day 2, paving stones thinned into packed dirt. Day 3, that dirt became rutted frost mud under the shadow of the Shatterrange, those jagged mountains rising ahead like broken teeth, chewing cloud. They traveled with 2 wagons, one for supplies, one for bodies, if it came to that. The wagons bore no insignia. The oath-bearers did not announce themselves with banners. They arrived like consequences, quiet, clinical, and difficult to appeal. At a way station in Carrick Pass, wedged between rock and wind, an innkeeper served stew that tasted of onion and fear. He didn't ask where they were going. People in the foothills learned early that questions were a kind of prayer, sometimes answered, often punished. Mara watched the room while the others ate. Locals glanced at their weapons and looked away. A trader with a guild pin tried not to stare at Z, failed, then drowned curiosity in ale. 2 militia boys whispered in the corner, half thrilled, half terrified. Young enough to think danger was a story with an ending. Blight, blackroot, wrongness. The words were always ahead of them, moving faster than horses. They crossed the Shatterrange at dawn on the 4th day. The pass was narrow, choked with rock. Wind cut like wire. Below them, the Republic's ordered world looked small. Roads like threads. Farms like careful lies. On the eastern descent, the land changed. Not dramatically. Not in a way you could point at and accuse. That was the worst part. The Blight, when it was clever, didn't announce itself with fire. It arrived the way rot arrived, quietly, patiently, as if it had been there all along, and you were only just noticing. Trees grew thicker. Undergrowth went quiet. Streams ran clear, but without the chatter of birds above them, Even the light felt reluctant, as if it didn't want to be the first thing noticed. That night, they camped off the main road. No fires, no songs, rations cold. The forest breathed around them like a great animal pretending to sleep. Kellen moved through the tree line like a shadow, checking other shadows, hands never far from his blade. Iriel sat hunched over her spellbook, drawing and redrawing a geometry that made Mara's eyes ache to look at. Lines that wanted to be circles, circles that refused to close. Holden checked bandages and tonics with a surgeon's calm. Stone sharpened his blade in slow, steady strokes, the scrape of whetstone a metronome for nerves. Z sat apart, palms open on her knees, as if listening with her skin. Rook crouched beside Mara. She's listening again. She's always listening, Mara said. Rook's voice lowered. It's closer than she's letting on. Mara stared into the dark and, unbidden, remembered the taste of dying. Not the death itself. Returning didn't preserve that cleanly. The hero program took what it needed. The lesson, the reflex, the sharpened edge. It left the rest blurred, as if mercy lived in forgetfulness. Fragments. Falling. Blood metal on the tongue. A bright sound like glass struck with a hammer. Then waking in a new body with someone else's hands, and your mind slightly shifted. Sharper where it mattered. Blunted where it didn't. Mara had returned twice. She did not intend to make a habit of it. Dain's worried, Rook said. Dain is paid to worry. No, Rook pressed. Not about the Blight. About what happens after. About the guilds taking border contracts. About the council losing the line. About the Republic turning into a kingdom with a different name. Mara's jaw tightened. That's above our pay. Rook's grin flashed, humor without warmth. So is half of what we're asked to do. Mara looked towards Z. And her? Rook followed her gaze. She's her. That was as honest as anyone could be. Z opened her eyes. In the dark, her gaze found Mara, as if Mara had been a torch. It's in the roots, Z said softly. Stone's whetstone stopped. Holden lifted her head. What is? Kellen asked from the trees. Z's voice stayed calm, but something in it tightened. Cord drawn taut. The Blight, not everywhere, she said. Not yet. But it has touched the soil along the riverline that feeds Larchgate. Iriel's pen hovered. How can you tell? Z's eyes didn't leave the darkness. Because the weave is saw. A human word, almost, and it made Mara's stomach tighten. Saw meant bruised. Bruised meant struck. Struck meant someone had swung. Mara rose. Pack, she said. We move at first light. They didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, the road bent toward Larchgate Valley, like a finger pointing at a wound. By midday, pines rose, thick and black on either side, needles swallowing light. The air tasted of sap and cold iron. Fog clung low, as if the ground were exhaling something it didn't want in its lungs. The river appeared first, called the North Run on maps, though Here it was simply the water. It moved too smoothly. Not frozen, not sluggish. Smooth, like its surface had forgotten how to ripple. The smell beneath wet stone was metallic, like old coins left too long in a pocket. Holden noticed it at the same time Mara did. Halden's hand went to her satchel without thinking. The first sign of the town wasn't the palisade. It was the absence. No crows on branches, no finches in brush, no distant cry. The forest felt held, like it was keeping its breath. Kellen returned from a forward sweep and lifted a hand. "Track stop," he said. Mara frowned. "Stop how?" Kellen pointed ahead. "Wagon ruts, boot prints, then nothing." Like the ground decided it didn't want to remember feet anymore. Iriel muttered a curse in Old Elven, and even Rook looked briefly uneasy. Stone spat into the mud. "That's not a town problem. That's a world problem." Mara nodded once. Formation. Quiet. They advanced with practiced spacing, far enough apart that one strike couldn't take them all, close enough that a scream would be heard. They crested a low rise. Larchgate lay below, tucked into the bend of the North Run. A palisade ringed it, like a belt pulled tight. Chimneys stood, but no smoke rose. No dogs barked, no children shouted. The market square was empty, stalls standing like ribs. The watchtower on the ridge sat intact, platform bare, the wind moving through it as if the wood had forgotten why it had been built. It didn't look destroyed. It looked paused. At the gate hung a lantern burned down to nothing. And low on the palisade, where river fog kissed the wood, a dark smear spread through the grain, like bruising, like ink spilled into a wound. Z stepped beside Mara. The air around her shifted, the way the world leaned away from a storm. "Captain," Z said. "Yes?" Z's eyes fixed on the palisade, on the smear that did not belong. "It knows we're here," Z said. Mara's hand tightened on her sword hilt. "How?" Z blinked once, slow as a door closing. "Because it is listening," she said. "And it wants to learn what heroes sound like when they stop being brave." Below them, Larchgate waited, silent, intact, and wrong. And somewhere beneath root and river stone, something had found a way to breathe. And it was spreading fast. Mara kept them on the rise for a long moment, letting her eyes drink in what her instincts already disliked. Larchgate did not look like a place that had fought. No scorch, no shattered beams, no broken palisade where frightened hands had tried to buy themselves time. The town sat intact beneath a lid of fog, as if someone had placed a glass over it and forgotten to lift it again. "Perimeter first?" Mara said. Her voice didn't carry, but it didn't need to. The seventh oath moved when she breathed differently. Kellen had already started down the slope at an angle. Careful as a man crossing a floor he suspected might bite. He did not look back for permission. Scout work was the language of trust. If you had to ask, you'd already failed. Rook slid into motion beside Stone. Dwarf and half-orc paired the way a locksmith pairs tools. Different weights. same purpose. Halden stayed close enough to patch either of them, far enough back that she wouldn't be the first to bleed. Iriel's hood came up. She pulled a strip of charcoal from her satchel and rolled it between her ink-stained fingers, as if feeling for the shape of the day's lies. Z stood at Mara's shoulder, stillness turning the air around her slightly wrong. Fog beaded on everyone else's coats. On Z, it hovered, uncertain whether it was allowed to touch. Mara gestured with 2 fingers, clockwise, sweep around the valley. 2-man elements, no shouting, no names unless you have to. If you hear something you can't explain, don't listen to it. Rook finished, eyes on the palisade. Mara's mouth tightened. Exactly. Stone's hand went to the leather strap of his shield harness. He did it quietly, almost gently, like he was fastening a child into a carriage. Gates are choke point, he rumbled. It's also a mouth, Iriel said, and her pale eyes flicked to the dark smear on the palisade. Look at the grain, it's soaked. That's not paint, that's something that got in. Rook snorted, but the sound had no humor in it. Lovely. Z's gaze stayed on the smear. It's tasting, she said. Halden glanced at Mara, then deliberately did not ask how Z knew. After you'd watched Z read the Blight the way a sailor read cloud banks, you stopped questioning the weather and started securing the rigging. Mara pointed to the ridge watchtower. We start there. High ground. If there's a living eye in that town, it'll have been there. Kellen's shadow slipped through the tree line, circling wide. Minutes passed. The fog thickened in the valley, thinning on the rise like breath, leaving a dying man. Mara watched the still town and felt the familiar pinch behind her ribs. Half fear, half irritation. The Republic trained its heroes to ignore fear. Then it discovered that fear was sometimes the only honest intelligence you got. Kellen returned without sound. He crouched, gloved fingers tracing the air, like he was drawing a map no one else could see. No movement, no heat smoke, no latrine stink, not even carrion. Stone frowned. No carrion means no bodies. Or no scavengers, Halden murmured. Kellen nodded once. Tracks stop at the road and at the ferry slip, like somebody wiped the world clean with a cloth. Mara studied the river. The North Run did not move like water should. It held its surface too smooth, too whole, as if it had learned stillness from glass. Any sign of the ferry? She asked. Kellen's jaw tightened. Ropes still tied, post still set. Nothing on the water, nothing on the bank, just absence. Rook huffed quietly. Town swallowed its own tongue. Iriel was already marking the air with charcoal, quick slashes that became angles, angles that became a pattern. Before we go down there, she said, we need a boundary, something the weave recognizes as us. Mara nodded. Do it. Iriel knelt, drew a thin ring in the dirt at their feet. She added smaller glyphs, clean, geometric, not pretty. This wasn't elven poetry. This was engineering. Her fingers moved with the efficiency of a locksmith and the reverence of a surgeon. Step through, she said. One at a time. Rook gave her a look. If I grow an extra arm, I'm naming it after you. Make it useful, Iriel said, and there was a sliver of something like a smile. A small kindness, offered and withdrawn before anyone could accept it. They stepped through the ring. The air on the other side felt the same, and that, alone, was a relief. Z stepped last. The charcoal ring shivered, not in fear, but in recognition, like a dog that didn't know whether it should bow or bite. Iriel's eyes flicked to the ring, then away. She didn't comment. She didn't have to. Mara set them moving down the slope. The descent into Larchgate Valley felt like walking into someone else's dream, one that had begun to curdle. Fog licked at their boots. The pines closed behind them. Even their footfalls sounded muffled, as if the air didn't want noise to reach the town. At the edge of the palisade, the smear became clearer. It wasn't a splash. It was a spread, as if something had pressed itself to the wood and then seeped. Rook approached first, knife already in hand, but held low, careful. He leaned in, sniffed once, and immediately regretted it. "That's not sap," he muttered. Stone placed 2 fingers against the palisade, gentle enough to be respectful. The wood did not feel wet. It felt slick, like a surface that had been polished by too many unseen hands. Halden crouched, inspected the ground. "No boot prints here," she said. "Nothing coming in or out." Kellen pointed at the gate bar. It's set from the inside. Mara's gaze went to the watchtower ridge again. Empty. The platform stared down like an open eye that had forgotten how to blink. "Rook stone," Mara said. "Gate." They didn't speak. Stone took the right post, broad shoulder, angled to cover Rook. Rook slipped his knife into a crack near the bar and tested it with the patience of a man disarming a trap. The bar shifted with a dry wooden groan that sounded too loud in the valley's hush. And then the fog did something strange. It pulled inward, as if the opened gate had become a throat. Halden's hand tightened on the strap of her satchel. Kellen's eyes narrowed. Mara felt her skin tighten, not from cold, but from a pressure she couldn't name. Z's voice came softly. "It noticed." Mara swallowed the urge to look back over her shoulder. "We go in," she said, slow. "And if you hear—" "Don't listen," Rook murmured again and slid the bar free. The gate swung open on hinges that should have squealed. They didn't. The silence was worse. Inside, Larchgate smelled of wet wood and cold iron. No smoke, no cooking fat, no animals, not even the sour ammonia of a stable. Homes stood with shutters closed or hanging slightly ajar, as if someone had paused mid-gesture. A rope coil lay in the mud, one end still looped around a hitching post. A wagon stood half-loaded near a timber yard. The bed held sacks of grain and a rolled blanket, like a family had been interrupted mid-flight. There were no tracks leading away. It hit Mara the way certain silences did in the field, like stepping into a room where the air had been vacuumed out. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of something missing. A pattern with a tooth pulled clean. No blood, no broken bone. Just absence where pain should have been. Order like this didn't happen by accident. People fled messy. People fought messy. Even when they died neatly, the world left signs. Scuffs in mud, splinters on wood, the sour stink of fear caught in cloth. Here there was only the work left unfinished, and the town holding its breath as if it had been told to. Mara signaled 2 fingers. Split. Kellen left lane. Rook right. Halden stays center. Stone on me. Iriel. Wards and eyes. Z was already watching the town, as if it were a living thing deciding whether to bite. Z with me. Mara finished. They moved through the street in measured steps. The market square opened ahead, stalls empty, awnings slack. A child's wooden toy lay on its side near a barrel, no footprints around it. The toy's painted face smiled up at nothing. Halden paused just long enough to swallow whatever rose in her throat. She did not touch the toy. Touching things in a Blight zone was how you invited the world to touch you back. Kellen ghosted between buildings. Every few paces he paused, head tilted, listening with his whole body. Rook's eyes kept flicking to windows. If something jumps, he muttered, I'm going to be furious. Stone grunted softly. Try to live first, rage later. Rook's scarred lip twitched. Spoken like a man who can be a door. Iriel drifted near the center line, charcoal in hand. She marked subtle signs on posts, corners, door frames, tiny ward points. Not enough to announce themselves. Enough to triangulate if the weave started to bend. Still no bodies. Halden whispered. Bodies make noise, Kellen said from the left. His voice was low, almost reluctant. This is tidy. Mara felt her gloves itch. Clean gloves in a dirty world made her feel like she was tempting fate. She kept her hands steady anyway. Z slowed near a well at the market's edge. The rope still hung, bucket still tied. The bucket rested against the stones like it had been dropped without finishing the pull. Z's eyes fixed on the dark water. Mara took a step closer. Z? Z didn't answer immediately. Her head turned slightly, listening to something that wasn't sound. The Blight is under this, she said. Halden's breath caught. In the well? Under the town, Z corrected. It threads through the roots and stone. But Kutha, here it is louder. Mara's gaze swept the square. What do you mean, louder? Z finally looked up. When her eyes met Mara's, Mara felt the sensation again, being measured, but not judged. Like Z wasn't asking if Mara was good. She was asking if Mara was still Mara. It is watching us learn it, Z said. It wants to know how we move, how we speak, how we become afraid. Rook's knife lifted a fraction. Can it see? Z's voice didn't change. Not with eyes. Kellen appeared like a shadow at the edge of the square. Captain, he said. Mara pivoted. Report. He pointed toward the chapel. Doors open, candles melted down, but there's no soot, no wax trail, just stubs, like someone snapped time off. Iriel's gaze sharpened. Weave lag, temporal drag, That's not just rot. That's rewrite. Stone's shoulders rose and fell in one slow breath. Chapels where people run when they don't know what else to do. Or where the Blight goes to learn what people sound like when they pray, Rook said. Mara didn't like the way that landed. She signaled forward, chapel. They crossed the square. Their boots made almost no sound. The fog thickened as they approached the chapel door, curling around the threshold like it was guarding something. Z's braid didn't move in the wind. It didn't move at all. Mara put Stone to her right, cover, and gestured Kellen to the left flank. Rook slipped a step ahead, knife forward, dwarf body low and ready to spring. Halden took one look at the doorway and whispered, almost to herself, "No blood." Iriel touched the doorframe with 2 fingers. Her eyes closed for a heartbeat. "The weave is strained," she murmured, "like a robe that's been pulled too long." Z's voice came quietly, terribly calm. "And something is pulling it." Mara lifted her hand. "Halt." In that moment, a sound drifted out of the chapel. Not a scream, not a growl. A whisper-thin drag, like wet fingertips drawn across wood. Rook went still. Holden's eyes widened. Kellen's pupils tightened to slits. Mara felt the instinct to lean in, to listen harder, to understand. That instinct was the trap. She clenched her jaw until it hurt. "Eyes up," she whispered. "We don't chase sound." Z's head angled a fraction. "It is learning," she said, as if confirming a theory. Then, from somewhere deeper inside the chapel, a voice spoke, soft, broken, and almost familiar. "Captain?" It wasn't loud. It wasn't a shout. It was the kind of voice you heard when you leaned close to someone dying. Mara froze for half a heartbeat, because the voice had the cadence of an oath-bearer comm line. And if it was what her spine said it was, then the Blight had already learned the most dangerous language in the Republic. Rook's scarred mouth pulled tight. "That wasn't one of ours," he breathed. Z's eyes stayed on the doorway, like stormlight held behind glass. "No," she said softly, "but it wants to be." And inside the chapel, something shifted. Something that did not make footsteps, did not make breath, but made the air feel like it had been touched by cold fingers. Mara raised her hand again. Not forward this time. Hold. Because the most important thing the 7th Oath could do, standing on the threshold of a quiet chapel in a quiet town, was refuse to be hurried by fear. And somewhere beneath Larchgate's stones, the Blight listened, patient, curious, and spreading fast. Mara held her hand up, palm outward. "Stop." And the 7th Oath froze in the shape of their training. The chapel doorway yawned black and patient, fog curling at its threshold like breath drawn in slow through teeth. That whisper, "Captain," still clung to the air in the way certain smells clung to cloth. Stone's shoulders set, ready to become a wall. Rook's knife rose a finger's width. not aimed at the doorway so much as at the space around it. Kellen's eyes stayed on the darkness, unblinking. Halden's hand tightened on her satchel strap until her knuckles paled. Iriel's charcoal-stained fingers hovered near her war tools. Z stood behind Mara, still as carved ivory, yet the air around her felt charged, the way the world felt just before it chose lightning. Mara didn't answer the voice. Answering was a thread. A thread became a tether. The Blight, if it wanted anything, wanted you tethered. She leaned toward Holden without taking her eyes off the doorway. Wax. Holden understood instantly. She produced a small tin from her satchel, soft seal wax, meant for wounds and weather. Mara's gesture was terse, practiced. All of you. Ears. Now. Rook's scar-split lip curled. We are plugging our ears before a chapel. We are plugging our ears before a lure, Mara corrected. Holden moved down the line fast, pressing wax into each ear canal. The world dulled immediately. Sharp edges filed down, the forest's hush turning thick and distant. Stone accepted the wax with grim patience. Kellen fitted his himself, eyes never leaving the black. Iriel added cloth over wax, double-layered discipline. Z did not reach for anything. Mara glanced back. Z's gaze didn't shift from the doorway. It won't work, she said. Not arrogance, a simple field fact. That was the problem with Z. She was never dramatic. She was precise. Mara nodded once and shifted into the other half of the rulebook. The team had a doctrine around Z formal, written in clipped Republic language and repeated enough times to become instinct. Z does not initiate. Z escalates only on command or to prevent team extinction. Handlers anchor, captain authorizes, collateral is the enemy. No heroics, no improvisation. No letting the weapon decide what mercy looks like. Because Z was family. Yes. And because Z, when unrestrained, was also a historical event. Mara's fingers made quick signs, 2 taps to her own chest, then an open palm towards Z. Anchor. Z inclined her head a fraction. Mara pointed 2 fingers at her own eyes, then at the doorway. Listen, report. Z's eyes remained stormlight behind glass. Understood. Iriel stepped to the threshold and drew a thin charcoal line across the doorframe, then murmured a phrase that was not prayer but geometry. The air thickened. The fog hesitated as though it had encountered a fence it didn't expect. Mara watched it, like a soldier watches wire. Dampener? Iriel said, voice muffled behind wax and cloth, and tapped her temple, sound, then closed her fist. Less. Mara dropped her hand slowly. Advance. And they moved. Inside, the chapel smelled wrong. Not blood, not smoke, not rot. Damp wood, cold stone, iron left too long in water, the scent of cellars and underbridges, and places where secrets grew teeth. Candles sat along pew ends, and the altar rail, burned down to blunt stubs without drips, without soot, time cut cleanly short. A hymn book lay open on a pew, pages crisp, untouched by damp. No cobwebs, no dust. As if someone had maintained the place without breathing. They moved in a wedge. Tight spacing, controlled angles, stone front right, rook front left, Mara center, Halden behind with hands free, Ariel offset with chalk and ward tools, Kellen sliding left aisle, Z back right with Mara's peripheral vision always aware of her. The altar stood beneath a carved wooden arch, sunburst and weed, an old hearth faith that had once comforted people who expected winter to be honest. There was a man kneeling at the altar, leather watch coat, mud-caked boots, hands clasped like prayer, head bowed. His shoulders trembled as if he were holding his breath too long. Mara lifted her fist, halt, and they stopped. The man raised his head slowly. His face was pale and tight, eyes bloodshot and unfocused, like he'd learned to fear his own senses. His mouth opened. No sound came. Then, faint even through wax and dampened weave, a vibration that wanted to be words. "Captain?" Mara did not answer. She pointed at Kellen. "Confirm identity." Kellen's gaze flicked over the man's hands, throat, the space behind the altar. The man reached into his coat with exaggerated slowness and drew out a thin slate. He set it on the floor and pushed it forward, like a letter under a door. Kellen moved, quick, clean, snatched it, and retreated without stepping into the open. Mara read the scratched lines. No sound. It hers, it uses, under, under, under. Don't listen, don't answer. Ebris, Lieutenant Ebris. The voice that had broken on comms. Mara kept her face still. Inside, something tightened. Not pity, not yet. Calculation. The Republic taught you to calculate first, so you wouldn't freeze when the feelings arrived. She gestured. "How long?" Ebris raised 5 fingers, then 3. 8 didn't fit. Ebris shook his head violently, then scraped again, frantic. Time is wrong. Candles lie. Sleep lies. Ariel's eyes flicked to the candle stubs, then to the stones beneath them, as if listening to strain in a foundation. A local time slip wasn't theatrics. It was logistics. It meant your watches lied, your rotations lied, your fatigue lied. It meant you could be ambushed by your own assumptions. Halden moved toward Ebris. Slowly, palms visible, then stopped a step short when Z spoke. "Do not touch him bare," Z said. Halden nodded, pulled on heavier gloves, then crouched. Ebris flinched, as if touch itself was a weapon. Halden didn't force contact. She held up fresh wax and cloth and gestured toward his ears. Ebris's eyes widened. He nodded rapidly. Halden replaced the ragged plugs stuffed into his ears. Wax and cloth worn too long, stained, and crusted. The relief that hit Ebris looked like grief trying to escape through his ribs. Mara's anger rose, slow and hot. The Blight wasn't only killing, it was training. Teaching people that sound was death. Teaching them to fear their own voice. teaching them to become prey that policed itself. Kellen's gaze snapped upward. In the rafters above the altar, a thin thread hung down, translucent, wet, nearly invisible, unless the lantern caught it just right. It swayed gently, but there was no wind. Z's eyes lifted and held. "Not alone," she said. Iriel's charcoal came out. She marked 2 pillars with tight sigils, anchor points. Her breathing stayed controlled, but her shoulders were tense with the strain of keeping the weave from fraying further. From behind the altar came a shift in pressure. Not footsteps, something subtler. The sense of air being displaced by something that didn't want to be seen. Rook's knife rose. Stone's stance widened. Breech posture, ready to absorb impact. Mara's fingers flicked once toward Z. "Hold." Z did not move. That, too, was doctrine. Z was not their first answer. She was their last. Because the last answer ended arguments. A whisper-thin drag came again, wet fingertips across wood. Faint, intimate, wrong. It pushed against wax, tried to make curiosity itch. Mara clenched her jaw until it hurt. "Eyes up," she mouthed, more for herself than for anyone. "We do not chase sound." Z spoke quietly, and the calm in it made Mara's blood cool. "It is probing discipline," Z said. Mara pointed to Iriel. "Sever." Iriel whispered a hard phrase and drew a line in the air, like cutting thread with invisible shears. The hanging filament recoiled as if struck, whipping up into shadow and vanishing into the rafters. A soft exhale came from behind the altar. Not breath, something mimicking breath. Rook's eyes narrowed. His knife hand steadied. Rage kept on a short leash. Stone's gaze stayed forward, unblinking. Kellen found the altar's edge and slipped around it, careful as a man handling a trapped animal. He lifted the cloth draped there. A hatch. Half hidden, half waiting. He tested it once. It didn't resist. It yielded, the way a door yields when someone on the other side has already turned the lock. Ebris made a sound, more animal than word. His eyes went wide. He shook his head violently and scratched at his slate again, frantic. "Don't go down. It wants you down. It learns heroes." Halden swallowed hard. Her eyes flicked to Mara with a medic's question. "If he's bait, do we cut the line or carry him?" Mara didn't answer with words. She squeezed Holden's shoulder once. "We carry." She met Ibris's gaze and pressed her fist to her chest, oath, then pointed to the team, together, then to the hatch, duty. Ebris's eyes squeezed shut for a heartbeat. When they opened, resignation sat behind them like a second shadow. He nodded once. Mara turned to the stairwell. "This is what it wants," Rook mouthed through wax. "Yes," Mara mouthed back. "So we do it on our terms." Her hand signaled the formation, tight and clear. Stone forward, anchor. Rook behind, blade. Halden center, lifeline. Iriel behind Holden, wards, Kellen rear, eyes, Z with Mara, containment and truth. And over it all, the one rule Mara never forgot. If Z is authorized, everyone else goes still. Because friendly fire didn't mean arrows. It meant history. Stone descended first. The stair creaked under his weight, and the sound died fast in the dark. Cold air rose from below, smelling of wet stone, iron, and a faint sweetness like fruit left too long in a cellar. At the bottom, the passage opened into an undercroft. Rough stone, old work, not Republic cut. Damp walls pressed close. Water dripped somewhere deeper, slow and patient. And in the stone itself, the Blight had written. Hairline cracks filled with dark veining, like ink poured into the bones of the town. Not splashed, threaded, not random, patterned. Z crouched with her palm hovering above the veining without touching. "It is in the structure," she said. Kellen scanned ahead and held up a fist. "Stop," then pointed right. A branching corridor. From that corridor came a whisper, barely a vibration through wax, like language, trying to remember how to be language. Iriel's lantern trembled, then steadied. Her eyes fixed on the branching dark, with the grim focus of someone who had drawn too many wards against things that didn't respect walls. Z tilted her head, listening beyond sound. "It is making a chorus," she said. "Not to sing, to test, to see what you follow." Stone's shoulders rose and fell, once. "Then we don't bite." Mara looked at the branching corridor, at the veined stone, at her team. 6 lives that could be spent and returned, but never returned whole, each death buying sharper skill at the cost of softer self. She lifted her hand, 2 fingers forward, palm down. "Move, slow." They advanced into the undercroft, deeper beneath Larchgate's intact streets and quiet homes. Above them, the town remained paused. Breath held, doors shut, candles lying. Below them, the Blight listened, patient, curious, and hungry, to learn what a hero sounded like when the dark finally got close enough to touch. And Mara Kestrel kept her hand near the signal that mattered most. Not advance, not attack, but the one that would authorize Z to become an answer the world could not take back.